The future belongs to the people who ask the right questions. I'd like to ask interesting personalities of Cebu the hard questions, the controversial questions, questions nobody's thought of asking. I've always gravitated to the latest news about philosophy, religion, science, and politics. Some people think those are very divisive topics. I beg to disagree. Nobody has a monopoly on life's big questions. For half an hour, I will try to dissect on how these people think and hopefully gain insight and understanding. Join me in asking the right questions right now. Hi guys, so we're here with the motivational speaker and best-selling author, Mr. Argo. Hi Al.
Hey Jiggy.
How you doing?
Man, I'm doing fantastic. How about you, mate?
I'm doing well myself. Al, in a nutshell, tell us all about Mr. Argo as a kid, Argo as a student, and Argo as an adult now.
Well, you know, as a child, my wife still does not believe this, but I was extremely shy. In fact, I could not even say my own name correctly. And so that's how I was as a young boy. And then as I became a teenager, I began to read some great books and began to hear some great speakers, and I began to really believe that I could achieve whatever I set my heart out to do. And so one of my first goals was to learn how to speak correctly so that people could understand. Can you understand me?
Of course, clearly.
You should. And so I set that goal. But for me, as a young teenager, that was a huge goal because, honest to goodness, I couldn't say my own name correctly. And so as a student, you know, again, sometimes I made A's and B's, but if I made an A, I worked hard for that A. So studying, it never came naturally for me. Again, I love books. I always loved books. But again, A's, I was not naturally attracted to A's. Does that make sense? And now as an adult, you know, I'm not sure exactly when the habit of reading took hold. It must have been 15 or 16 years ago, but even maybe 10 years ago, I would begin a book, but I'd never finish that book. Does that make sense? It would take me forever because naturally I'm a very slow reader. And so at some point, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, I set a goal to finish reading one book a month. And at the end of 12 months, I said, okay, yeah, I finished it. So the next year, I set a goal to finish 2 books a month. And I finished that goal. And then the next year, I set a goal to finish 4 books a month. And so by the end of that year, I had finished 52 books. And so now, on average, I'm able to finish about 50 to 60 plus books a year. Reading can change your life. Don't you agree?
Yes, completely.
So that's just a little bit about me.
So you grew up in the United States, right?
Yeah,
You're not from Cebu.
I'm not from Cebu.
Tell us a little about that. Growing up in what part of the United States, and what was the prevailing atmosphere there at that time?
So, have you ever seen the movie Forrest Gump?
Yes, of course. Everybody saw that movie.
Forrest Gump is my third cousin. Hey, Forrest. And Forrest is actually a speaker. And now he and I are not really third cousins, but he is a speaker. His name is Steve Weber. He's out there, maybe watching this video, and he's doing great things in the U.S. But I grew up in Alabama, where Forrest Gump in the movie grew up. So my wife and I are both from the small little area in the southeastern part of the U.S. So it's laid back and a little like Cebu because we're a little laid back here. Our weather's more like Baguio because sometimes it gets cold up in Baguio City, and so in Alabama, where I'm from, it kind of gets cold. About 11 years ago, we moved to Singapore. We were in Singapore for about 10 years, and then about 1 year ago, we moved here to Cebu, the Queen City of the South, and we love it here.
You know, it's always a surprise to a lot of us here in the Philippines if we see Americans who decide to live here in the Philippines, because most of us in the Philippines, at least a lot of people in the Philippines, dream of living in some foreign land, let's say for example the United States or Europe or some other part of Asia, but instead you decided to live here amongst us here in the Philippines, in Cebu. Why Cebu? Of all the countries in the world, why did you choose Cebu to live in?
Yeah, maybe I didn't choose Cebu, but Cebu chose me. And so my wife and I and our children had visited here only one time before we made the decision to move here. Now, we'd been to other parts of the Philippines, and so again, in Cebu, again, we've only been here 1 year, but there's so much potential. I've told many people this, that in 10 to 15 years, I see Cebu becoming like the next Singapore. And we were in Singapore 10 years. There's a lot of similarities, and the key is to make sure that in government, in economics, in education, that we stay on the right track. We have to make sure our roads are in order, that our infrastructure is in order, to really expand, to really grow the way I see Cebu growing. We want to do it right. We want to be an international city. We want to be a learning and development city for all of Asia. We're already a great shipping area. There's lots of great things going on in Cebu. Real estate's booming, of course, and what a great place to be. And so my encouragement for you listening is to take advantage of every opportunity. And the key thing is make sure you learn, to make sure you're continuing to grow, and to make sure you're doing the best right where you are. That makes sense?
Yeah. So you're a best-selling author. You have a book out. It's called Walking, Living, Learning.
Walking, Living, Learning.
You're a motivational speaker as well. In fact, I think you're a motivational speaker first before you became an author, or which came first?
That's right. Yeah. First of all, I was a reader. So reading comes first. And then, I set a goal, and then I just began to speak. Again, in the U.S., I would speak in churches, I'd speak in schools, I speak in nursing homes, I spoke for farmers, I'd speak for anybody who would listen. Make sense? And then I set a goal to not only finish reading books, but also finish writing books. So for years I would write, and I just wasn't finishing the book that I was writing. So I have a lot written, and then I have one book that's about 80,000 words called Walking, Living, Learning, that's out on the market now. You can get it on Kindle, Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and so again, it covers all things personal and professional development.
So how did you end up in the motivational speaking industry? Because you obviously were a writer first. What was that one moment that made you decide, hey, I'm going to be a motivational speaker? What happened?
Yeah, I was a speaker first. So the reading came first, the speaking came second, and then the writing came third.
Okay.
And
so how did you end up here?
So how did I end up here? My wife and I,
in this industry, I mean.
Yeah, so it's just a process. It's just a natural progression of setting goals and then helping people, because companies, organizations, profit and non-profit, we all need help in leadership development, in sales and motivation. Companies and organizations, as individuals, we are naturally growth-seeking individuals. We don't want to stay stagnant.
So there was no one moment that made you decide to become a motivational speaker. There was no, moment like that. Can you recall that?
There actually was. And I was in college, and I again, I was in college. I was just learning how to speak correctly and clearly and confidently, and I actually heard a motivational speaker named Charlie Tremendous Jones, and Charlie eventually became one of my mentors. His daughter Tracy Jones still lives in the U.S. and runs the publishing company in the U.S. Tremendous Life Books, and so when I heard Charlie Tremendous Jones speaking in college, and then I heard him several times in college, and then he eventually became one of my mentors and spoke into my life, and so it was when I was in college when I really began to have this dream. But when you first have the dream, it's like the impossible dream. Does that make sense? Because again, I couldn't speak correctly. Even though I was in college, I couldn't say words like air conditioner or world. Make sense?
So you've been in the motivational speaking industry for a long, long time. The question that I have for you now, Al, is what motivates a motivational speaker? What motivates Al Argo?
You know, that's a great question. There's two things. Number one, I have a strong relationship with the Creator, and so I have a strong faith in God, and so that's ultimately my main motivation. And second of all, my wife. You know, are you married?
Yep.
Yep. So of course you're married because I've known you for a while. But my wife's a great motivator. So my relationship with God the Father, my wife, and my children. And then also another area, because I still have a thirst to learn. I tell people my name's Al. It's an acronym for always learning. My wife sometimes says you're Al, you're always loving. My kids say sometimes you travel too much, so you're always leaving. But my mom, she knew me best. She said, you're Al, you're always lying.
You teach people to sell. You motivate them. What for you in your mind is the best-selling idea in the world in the history of selling? What do you think is the best-selling idea in the world?
Well, that's a great question, and I have to say off the top of my head, Coca-Cola.
The soft drink.
The soft drink. Again, Coca-Cola was started not too far from where my wife and I grew up in the U.S. And it was started around Atlanta, Georgia, and we grew up about an hour from Atlanta over in Alabama. And there's not a place in the world. I was in Nepal recently, earlier this year. I've been in Thailand, we've been in China, Vietnam. Everywhere we've gone, Indonesia, India, everywhere we've gone, we find Coca-Cola. Yeah, so yeah.
I think it's the most popular word in the world next to okay, I think Coke is number one or number two.
You know, it makes sense to me. That makes sense.
Okay and Coke.
And they do marketing right. They're consistent in their branding. And yeah, everybody loves Coke. You know?
So, since you teach salesmen to become better at what they're doing, what is the difference, Al, between a good salesman and an excellent salesman?
You know, that can be found on Super Sales Seminar on Facebook and Sales 101 every morning on Y101.
Or you can tell us a little bit about what do you think makes an excellent salesman in a nutshell.
Yeah, it comes down to, first of all, your attitudes and your actions. I tell people everywhere I go about the time I jumped out of an airplane and my parachute didn't open completely. I had a great attitude, but my actions needed to line up and make sure that parachute opened. So attitudes and actions are extremely important. I believe, as a professional salesperson, you need to make sure that you're fostering your relationships, taking care of your health, your energy, small things, but things that make an extreme difference over the long haul. You see success and significant success. If you begin to make mistakes, it may not be noticeable immediately, but over time those mistakes are noticeable. But then, on the other hand, if you begin to make small positive changes, like maybe for example, I'm a strong person of faith. So if you were to read your Bible every day, that's a good decision to get you focused for the day. If you were to pray and ask God to help you, that's a good decision for me to help me stay focused. If you were to, all of us talk to ourselves. So you might as well say good stuff to yourself. So if you say, I can do it. I believe that I'm the greatest salesperson in the world. In fact, I'm just looking here at this book. This is the greatest salesman in the world. If you've not read this book, read this book by Og Mandino. You've read this book,
yes,
right?
Of course, a bazillion times.
And so we love this book, and so this book can help you stay focused. So reading is a key factor to becoming a great salesperson. Attitude and action, your relationships, your resources, your energy level. Makes sense? Goal setting is extremely important. You have to set goals and clear, specific, and ambitious goals. But then goal setting alone is not enough. You have to have a growth plan. And again, that's where the reading comes in. And then you also have to be aware of your obstacles. You see, as a salesperson, as a leader in any industry, we all have obstacles. When I was a young person, I couldn't communicate clearly. It was an obstacle. But I was aware of it. but I turned it into an opportunity. So whatever obstacle you have in your life, as you become aware of it, you can ask God to help you and turn it into a great opportunity. That makes sense?
Makes perfect sense. You know, you mentioned that you have this great relationship with the Creator, with your God. You're obviously a very spiritual person, right? Am I right?
That's right.
Does that make you a better salesman, or does it hinder you in some way?
Well, I don't think it hinders me. In fact, my mentors, Zig Ziglar, he had a strong faith in God. Charlie Tremendous Jones, he had a strong faith in God. Og Mandino, if you were to read this book, you would see that he also had a strong faith in God the Father. And so it's a relationship. It's not a religion, but it's a relationship. And just like you have a relationship with your wife, just like you have a real relationship with your children. Do you love your children?
Of course.
And so I love my wife, I love my children. And so I believe that, the God who created the world, he also loves us just like we are his children, because we really are. And so I think it helps me because it gives me wisdom, to make decisions that affect my daily life. Makes sense?
Yes, perfect sense.
It's a good question.
Yeah. So your religion has helped you more than it has hindered you. Has it ever become a stumbling block in a sales situation?
Well,
when somebody's aware of what your thoughts are, your spiritual background is.
No, again, it's more than a religion, it's a relationship. And I don't believe it's ever hindered me. I mean, I've seen some tough, in the U.S. we'd call them tough cookies. And these are people who are just like, in selling and in leadership, you have 4 personality styles. You have the dominant person who's, tell me quick, tell me why you're here. And that person is a great leader, and they value their time, but they're not really relationship oriented. And then you have more inspirational people who are like, I've got time for you. Let's build a relationship. And then you've got people who are not quick decision makers, but they're also very relational. And then you have people like accountants and tax attorneys who are real numbers focused. Again, they're not focused on relationships. So a small percentage of the people you're going to sell to are focused more on getting things done, and then a greater percentage of the people that you're selling to are focused on the relationship. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And again, that's the whole DISC personality profiling system.
One of the things about salesmanship and spirituality is there are some biblical teachings that I am aware of that sort of contradict acquiring wealth, because salesmanship is pretty much acquiring wealth, right? It's acquiring, selling things and acquiring wealth. And there are some biblical teachings that discourage that. In fact, that instead of acquiring wealth, you should be helping other people.
Yeah, it's a great question, Jiggy. But actually, I believe the Bible teaches, number one, that God honors hard work. In fact, there's a verse in the Old Testament, I can't remember if it's Psalms or Proverbs, but it says the man who sells will be blessed. And again, I believe in the sales seminar that you attended, I quoted that scripture because it's very powerful, it's very clear to me. And so we see Abraham, in the Old Testament, he sowed things, and other great men in the Old and New Testament were tent makers, so they were selling things. So there's nothing wrong with selling things. There's nothing wrong with acquiring wealth, as long as we're using that wealth, number one, to honor God, number two, to help others, and of course, we're using the wealth to bless our own family and community. So how can we bless other people? How can we bless our church if we don't have anything to bless them with? That makes sense?
It makes perfect sense.
So in my mind, selling and even becoming wealthy, honestly, as long as we're not greedy, there's a difference between, oh, it's mine, and never giving it back. That makes sense? So
yeah, but see, the thing is the Bible isn't so clear on how much. Does it mean that if you make enough to eat and have a roof over your head, is that enough wealth, or is that too much if you have a dime more? You know what I mean? You can make the argument that it's okay to acquire wealth because the Bible says so, but how much is enough? What does the Bible say when when you make $1,000,000 or $1,000,000 for that matter? Is that what's enough?
Yeah.
Is it 500,000 pesos? Is it? It's not very clear. So when you say that it's all right to acquire wealth, it doesn't say how much wealth.
That's right.
So where do you draw the line?
There's a parable in the New Testament where a very, very wealthy man gave money to his servants, and in fact these people were to invest the money. So they were his servants, or they were his investors, if you will. And so these men, they took what they had, and several of the men invested and received more. One of the men took what he had and he hid that. And so when the wealthy man came back, he actually took from the man who did not invest. And so again, that's a parable about investing. That's a parable about using the talent that we have wisely, and that's a parable even about growth economically and spiritually. And so again, it's not how much is how much, but as you and I give value to the world, as we give value to this community, we'll also receive value back. Now, it takes pesos to put petrol in the car.
Of course, yeah.
It takes pesos to put our children in school. It takes pesos to buy the iPad that this video is being filmed on. And so again, there's nothing inherently wrong with money. In fact, there's a great book you love to read, and there's a great book by a rabbi. I believe his name is Rabbi Daniel Layton, Lapin. He wrote a book I read a couple years ago. It's called "Thou Shalt Prosper," and so he's a Jewish man, lives in the U.S. And a fascinating, very thick book called "Thou Shalt Prosper." He goes all the way back to the Old Testament. And have you ever noticed that a lot of Jewish people are extremely wealthy?
Yeah, they run the United States. That's what I heard.
That's right. And he explains why Jewish families in Asia, in America, in Israel, and around the world, they follow the Old Testament covenant, and he explains from the Old Testament and even the New Testament why that is so, and how that you and I, as as people of faith, can also benefit from the biblical model. It's a fascinating book.
So there is no limit,
I don't believe
to the amount of wealth
as
that you
long
acquire.
as you're giving back to God and giving back to the community and using your money in a right way. Absolutely not. Because again, Abraham, the Bible says Abraham was blessed to be a blessing. And so you, my friend, as you accumulate wealth, you and I, and everyone listening to us, as God blesses us, we are blessed, again, not to consume it on ourselves, but we're blessed to be a blessing. In fact, one of the ways that my wife and I love to bless people here in Cebu is we help run what's called Upward Sports. You've heard of Upward
Yes, of
Sports?
course, yes.
And so again, we're just coming down to the end of the first year here in Cebu, and maybe 5 or 10% of the children are able to pay their entrance fee. But then maybe 70 to 80% of those children are not able to pay. And so we scholarship them in using funds from either ourselves or from donors here in Cebu or donors in the U.S. Does that make sense? And so again, if you've not worked hard, if you've not sold, or if you've not led well, or if you've not, and again, it doesn't matter whether you start at Jollibee's or McDonald's or Burger King. The important thing is you start, and then you work hard, and then you keep learning, you keep growing, you keep giving, and the more you give, there's a biblical proverb that says the more you give, the more you shall receive. God blesses and God loves a cheerful giver. That's what my mom and dad taught me. Makes sense?
Yes, perfect sense. That was a very nice explanation, Al, on how the Bible, being a spiritual person, is complementary to being a salesman. But still don't have a limit on how much money I should acquire.
There's absolutely. There's as much as we can.
As much as you can.
Bring it on, brother.
Walking, living, learning. It sold a bazillion copies on Amazon.com. Tell us about, in a nutshell, Al, the process of writing that bestseller.
Okay, it's a great question. And again, I love Mac. And so I actually have a writing software on my MacBook, and it's called Scrivener. And just every day as I go walking, I come home and I write in Scrivener. And so Walking, Live, and Learning is actually a journal of 1 year. And again, I've been walking for 10 years. So Walking, Live, and Learning is just 1 year out of 10 years of all the lessons. Sometimes it's leadership, sometimes it's parenting, sometimes it's finance, sometimes it's selling. So every book has separate topics. And so I'm just giving my thoughts in a nutshell about the last hour that I spent walking, living, learning. Makes sense?
Wow.
So when you read Walking, Living, Learning, it's like you're reading the synopsis of 66 other great motivational non-fiction books. Yeah.
Non-fiction books, that's right. Speaking of books, you have a brand new book that you're working on. In fact, it'll be out real soon. Tell everybody about the book.
So the brand new book, Jiggy, is called 60 Seconds to Sales Success. Walking, Live, and Learn is quite thick. And so I got some feedback from some of the publishers, and they want smaller books. Like this is a smaller book. And so Walking, Live, and Learning, Walking, Live, and Learn is quite thick. So the new book, 60 Seconds to Sales Success, is again, you and I kind of wrote that book together, because every morning I do the Sales 101 on Y 101, and so 60 Seconds to Sales Success is just our first 60 sales tips that you and I put together sometime way last year. Again, the process of editing and getting the cover and everything, it takes time, but we're really excited about the first, second, and third edition of 60 Seconds to Sales Success.
And you also have a DVD. In fact, I have one on here right now. It's called Al's Fundamentals of Selling Success. Where can you get these?
So actually, you can just email us at supersalesseminar@gmail.com, or email us at argoglobal@gmail.com. And so this is Fundamentals of Selling Success, and we also have goal setting for success and significance. So these are actually recordings that have been recorded live in live events around Asia.
You know, you obviously come from the motivational or self-help industry. It has become $1 billion success worldwide. Why is it that people need to read all these books? Why do they need to get motivation from other people? I mean, why can't they do it themselves?
Well,
why has the motivational speaking industry or the self-help industry become $1 billion industry? What do you think is the core need of humans?
I think that people everywhere, in Vietnam, in Philippines, in the U.S., we understand where we are, that we have limitations, but we also understand that we want to do more, we want to be more, and I believe people really want to give back to society. And so that's why around 8 I'm known as a positive impact coach. And I believe, in leadership training and sales training and in upward sports and in other outreaches, that you and I, whether it's a medical mission or whether it's you on your radio show, or whether it's my friends in their restaurants or my friends in their retail businesses, whatever you're doing in Cebu or around the world, we can make a positive impact. And so the motivational industry, the personal growth industry, it exists because you and I understand there's still more that we can accomplish. And again, as long as it's going back to the fundamentals of focusing on God the Creator, God our Sustainer, that you and I have a real relationship with Him, and that He's empowered us to live in His image and to make a positive impact on the world, I think it's okay. What do you think?
I think it's okay too. In fact, I like that idea of being able to make as much as I can.
Make as much as you can and make as much of a difference as you can.
Of course. We'll do that.
It's good to see you, Jiggy. Thank you for having me on today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Al Argo, motivational speaker and best-selling author.